We all enjoy a bit of fantasy and flirtation. But what about the people who've become addicted to love? Now that might sound like an idyllic adventure through dreamy dates and unforgettable nights, but romantic addiction is a serious problem for your mental health. Today we're going to be resolving this issue, fortunately, through the power of education, because education is the number one way to unplug yourself from that repetitive cycle of romantic disappointments and ultimately chasing after something which does not exist. In today's video, I'm going to be bringing forwards my top 5 books to help you heal from your love addiction, with a specific focus on the psychology of projection and idealization. We'll also be looking at the biology and the everyday relationship dynamics that typically define love addiction, beginning with the first book that you saw me just hold up, Facing Love Addiction by Pia Mellody. Let's turn to this book for a wonderful 3-point summary of the warning signs of the love addict. So please listen to this. Of course, buy the books that capture your attention, but this is the defining moment of checking if maybe you are a bit of a love addict or a relationship addict. These are the warning signs from the book. Number 1 warning sign. Love addicts assign a disproportionate amount of time, attention, and value above themselves to the person to whom they are addicted, and this focus often has an obsessive quality about it. Number 2 sign of love addiction. Love addicts have unrealistic expectations for unconditional positive regard from the other person in the relationship. It's good language there because the phrase unconditional positive regard comes from Carl Rogers' psychology in the 1960s, which is very different from unconditional love. Unconditional positive regard is about wishing the genuine best for the other person. It's something that, as a therapeutic helper, I try and live in. I don't live in unconditional love. That would be completely unrealistic. It's a fantasy of the child. But unconditional positive regard is to invest your heart in the best outcomes of the other person. But in the case of a love addict, you're expecting that perpetually without a human element of fallibility, the natural shadows and conflicts that we fall into as two messy humans trying to form something hopefully collaborative and beautiful. Third sign of a love addict. Love addicts neglect to care for or value themselves while they're in a relationship. Of course, there is a real connection to codependency from the first page in the book. The definition of a love addict is someone who is dependent on, enmeshed with, and compulsively focused on taking care of another person. While this is often described as codependence, says that there's basically a lot more in the book that we can go into. That fine line between codependency and love addiction is signaled through the warning signs just there of basically dislocating your consciousness to a difficult and often dangerous degree where you completely devalue your identity, or maybe you actually define your identity as an extension of the person that you're dating. This is more of a typical pattern for women, at least at the superficial level. This is, it's Mrs. Smith, the wife of Mr. Smith. Oh, she's Joe's wife. You know, it's that idea of the man is the thing and she's an attachment that goes around him. But there's also a very interesting pattern with men, because the few men that will watch this kind of video, I won't comment in the comments box because men generally don't do that. Women are a lot more social with their healing. Men will watch these videos for many months and never say, hello to me or signal that they're going through something themselves. Men have a pattern which is a lot more subconscious in regards to love addiction. The love addict male, although he won't literally define himself as an extension of the women that he's dating if he's a straight male, he will do it via status. So he will chase, usually, this is a common pattern, he will chase ever higher and higher status indicators with ever more attractive or desirable women to define himself as an extension of the woman. To some degree, it's a very interesting psychological dynamic because a man, on one hand, explicitly will say that he's an autonomous, powerful man who don't need no woman, and yet he's actually chasing the high caliber woman who's going to complete his image in one way or another. And of course, there's a whole road of dysfunction that we need to go into. So let's turn towards the second book in today's video on love addiction. We've got Cupid's poisoned arrow from habit to harmony in intimate relationships. I'm going to be avoiding the S word so we can get this video out to more people. This is the kind of book that you want to read if you're interested in the biology and the neurochemistry of the intimate relationship cycle. And what I mean by that is the bedroom cycle in particular, particularly the feeling of going through a bedroom encounter to a moment of explosive, that word beginning with O, and chasing that compulsively, either with your partner or with adult distractions on the internet. These kinds of distractions where particularly men will have a fascination with crustaceans. They'll go on certain prawn websites where they're seeing naked crustaceans in the ocean and all kinds of devilish activities that keep them hooked on that very strange fixation. This will help you understand how to unplug from that, both at the personal level and the relational level, because this book in particular kind of brings out the challenging triggers of what happens when you get genuinely hooked on that build up, explosive moment of the big O. What typically happens, if you've noticed this in your own relationships, let me put this down. It's pretty similar for both men and women, even though there's differences at the first kind of stage. The stage in between is pretty similar. What will happen for most couples who are locked in a cycle of maybe sleeping together twice per week, let's say, or once per week, twice per week, is that they'll build up some tension, they'll have the release, hopefully it's a mutual release together, and there's usually a stage of a bit of distance, a bit of disconnect, and then some irritability. And often there's these dynamics of fighting or otherwise tussling in an unhealthy sense until, of course, they get all riled up and then they have another intimate release. Going into a book like this helps you to understand what's happening neurochemically in terms of your brain system and your genital system to create this very unstable cycle of irritability and, I just need to get off, I just need to have that tension release. And the reason I'm bringing it through in this video, it's got many other elements that are really useful, and I recommend you buy the book for yourself. The reason I'm bringing it through for the love addict is that this neurochemical aspect of love addiction, which is primarily a fantasy issue, it's primarily an imaginal issue in terms of trauma, it relates to safety and attachment, but in terms of fantasy, it's very much a creative, dreamy, kind of exploratory, dissociative space. You have to know what's happening with your body as it relates to your fantasy world. If the love addict doesn't understand how their compulsive chasing of either the love addict image of unavailable men and women on the crustacean websites, you can read between the lines beginning with P, I'm trying not to say it, someone who's using that kind of material to numb themselves out, they're locked in a cycle that is very difficult to get out of. But they might also be doing that with their actual flesh and blood romantic partner. It's well worth you unpacking. Let's go deeper into the psychology. We're going towards We by Robert Johnson. This is the first of the 3 books specifically looking at the psychology of the love addict. It's the most accessible book. It's a pretty easy read. You could read it in a day or two, and it brings forwards the Jungian idea of the idealized man and the idealized woman, the animus and the anima. There's much more complexity to those phrases, but for the sake of this video, it is the idealized fantasy image of the romantic other, which takes us immediately into the second book. I'll bring all these together. Maybe I'll bring all 3 books out and then we'll tie it together as the idea. This is the Eden Project, In Search of the Magical Other by James Hollis, and we have another Jungian, The Invisible Partners by John Sanford. Both of these books deal with the same issue of romantic fixation and the shadow dysfunctions between partners. If at the very beginning of the video I brought forwards the book Love Addiction, which is about the everyday psychology and misery of the romantic codependent, this is where you get to the real educational level of understanding why you have such a fixation on that particular type of person. This is the woman who always felt unsafe in her childhood for one reason or another, and she needs the strong, aggressive, really controlling, really orderly man to make her feel like her life's not falling apart. This is the man who had a very emotionally numb teenage life because he was doping out on video games and illicit substances, and he hasn't quite learnt the lesson that a healthy, mature female partner isn't someone who's an emotional hurricane of highs and lows, but someone who has genuine sensitivity, someone who's open in her heart and can bring forwards love and joy and connection and intimate communication in a more predictable way. Of course, she's a human, she's going to have ups and downs like anyone, but the man who's locked in that overcompensation for his emotional deadness is going to go for the hurricane woman, who of course is going to rip his life to shreds. You can't spend too long around a hurricane, you can't spend too long in the tornado until you find yourself standing on a concrete foundation and all of the walls have been blown away. Those are just two patterns. There are dozens and dozens of different conglomerations of the general principle of one man or one woman who has a certain dysfunction towards one side of the spectrum will overcompensate with a romantic fixation that indicates the healing movement towards what they've yet to integrate. In fact, let's bring out a quote from John Sandford's book. Really excellent book. I recommend you buy all three of these, all five of them, but specifically the 3 psychology books if you want to heal your patterns. This is a quote about what it means to actually fall in love or quickly fall in love with someone or fall in love at first sight and the whole projection dynamic around that. From the book. As a rule of thumb, it can be said that what we yearn for intimately is a symbolic representation of what we need in order to become whole. This means that intimate fantasies symbolically complement ego consciousness in a way that points us towards wholeness. Understanding the symbolic meaning of our intimate fantasies enables us to become less compulsive regarding them. That is, instead of being driven and possessed by them, our range of consciousness can be expanded by them. This is something that actually personally was a huge breakthrough for me, probably 5 or 6 years ago. I realized that in regards to the type of woman that I was always attracted to, because I hadn't healed some of my own traumas, and because I hadn't understood just how much range and flexibility I could have as a man in regards to my own emotional capacity, I always used to have that symbolic yearning for the very artistic, creative, emotionally in tune, living intuitively kind of girl. Of course, there were actual friends or actual romantic partners who I surrounded myself with that had these qualities, even if it was never a literal connection. I wanted proximity to that kind of woman. But over the years, as I've integrated that part of me that can genuinely live quite intuitively and enjoys my own creative expression and goes for a hell of a lot of barefoot walks and spends time with my own soul, I don't have that yearning for constant emotional, externally validating stimulus from this anima image of my other half that I haven't integrated. Of course, I'm generally a decently traditional man. I've got more developed feminine elements maybe than the average man, but as a whole, I'm pretty structured, I'm pretty linear, I'm pretty ordered in how I do my life. I professionally hold space, which is making a container for trauma to be resolved within, but it's also projecting a vision towards the future. It's where would you like to be in 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and a whole variety of structuring principles. It's masculine strength, it's containment. But if I didn't have that intimate element of my own feminine soul, my own ability to encounter deep emotional space and relate to that in a way where I can understand the feminine, I wouldn't be able to work with women. And over the last 3 years or so, about 70% of my clients have been women, which is, of course, has helped me to integrate more of an understanding of what it means to be a woman. It gets better and better, and I love this life. The principle that I want to emphasize from that sharing is if you understand the kind of pattern that you're normally attracted to, and generally speaking, I'm not unique. I'm not unique in terms of being a man who's attracted to women who give some kind of literal or indicative suggestion of them being more emotionally free. They're less rule-bound, they're less, stuck in their ways, they're not focused on money and career and impact and reputation and all of these things that men tend to fixate on. They're more in the moment and more present. That is a very general pattern, and of course the general pattern for the female romantic addict is to look towards the strong man who can keep her safe physically, emotionally, financially, mentally, and at the higher level, spiritually. She's looking for spiritual safety, which doesn't mean being wrapped up and contained behind a boundary which never breaks. It means the adventure of spirituality and consciousness. Women who are at higher levels of cognitive development, they'll go into the love addict pattern from a whole new level of perspective. If before they were caught upon the idea of the strong man just needs to be able to cover the bills and keep them safe from the coyotes down the road, both the men who act like coyotes and the literal predatory animals that are roaming the streets somehow in this strange imaginal realm that I'm painting. At level 1, she needs a safe, strong man. At level 2, she needs a safe and strong man. But at level 3, she needs a safe and strong man. It's the same words, but they mean different things in regards to what she's looking for. The higher level the person's development, the higher the level of nuance and healing and sophistication they'll need in their partner. But this still means that they're vulnerable towards that love addict pattern. If you understand that you lean towards relationship addiction and you have some kind of codependent tendency and you tend to look outside of yourself for something which you could discover inside of yourself, but you also have an awareness that we are humans who are meant to relate to each other, so there is such a thing as secure attachment. We should be in wonderful, healthy, loving relationships with people who are best for us and we're best for them, and going through those many different journeys and many different relationship types. If you recognize that both are happening, both your flight from reality, fantasy fixation on Prince Charming or the delightful forest nymph, and also your desire for mundane practicality of wonderfully supportive father or mother figure and all of the psychological elements around that, you can hopefully educate yourself to a point of not repeating the most toxic and energetically draining situations that you might have found yourself in before. It will go across the board, even in regards to you relating to the opposite sex as a workplace environment, let's say. You'll understand men or you'll understand women, respectively, far deeper if you've, of course, integrated your inner masculine and inner feminine. I'm going to do a few more videos on this in the near future, so watch out for them. For the sake of this video, it's going towards wholeness. It's symbolically understanding that your fixation is fundamentally an attempt to recompensate or rebalance from an underdeveloped or overcharged position, which is requiring a more equilibrium style of existence. You don't want these high highs and low lows. It's a very common universal principle, but even in regards to your own psychological development and your own character, you don't want to be all the way over here or all the way over there in regards to who you show up as in a day-to-day basis. You want to be structured yet flexible. You want to be soft yet hard. You want to be intuitive yet also very intellectually, cognitively practical. If you're interested in these videos, you genuinely want it all. You want to be a holistic, full spectrum individual, and to become a full spectrum individual, you better bloody well know your own psychology and your trauma history and why your attachment history in regards to anxious attachment, avoidance attachment, disorganized attachment, or maybe hopefully a secure attachment. Very few people watching videos like this had genuinely healthy secure attachment to both of their parents, which is why we have love addiction and romantic addiction tendencies, and it operates deeper and deeper the further that you go into the journey. For men in particular, I advise you unplug yourself from the voyeuristic shrimp watching websites, and for women I advise that you take a bit more self-esteem in regards to your own individual identity rather than attaching your self-esteem towards the man and his status and the person who he could be to you and who you could be in regards to him. These are the two generalized patterns. If you go from that stage to having more of your energy back, men withdraw their energy back from the world of fantasy fixation with the glowing screen. Women withdraw their energy back from defining themselves as an extension towards the man. That's the place where you can just about begin to do this work in earnest. But until if you're still wrapped up in those patterns, it's going to be difficult to even pick up a book like this and not feel incredibly triggered, or maybe even numbed out and apathetic and like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. Probably does apply to you. That's why you don't want to read the book, because you know you're going to be confronted with your own inadequacies and yet to be healed wounds. You can do the work, and you can heal these patterns, but it does require a genuine dose of honesty and self-reflection. In my own journey, I realized that some of the problematic relationships that I was in my teenage years were a direct result of me having a disconnected and compartmentalized relationship with my own emotional intensity, and I would basically project and overlay my own possibility for moodiness or euphoria or passion overall onto a woman where it was appropriate. For men, this is, again, a general pattern, but we tend to do this. We tend to give ourselves the excuse to be passionate and non-rational and swept up in love because of the woman where that's attached to. It tends to be the most easy way for us to excuse ourselves being a bit out of character because, oh, she's just fantastic. Women have their own patterns. Point is that you need to discover your own patterns, and at the very least, I hope this video has given you 5 books which you can purchase for yourself. I will hold them up once more. Please screenshot them if you watched all the way through. At least 3 of these books, I hope you. We've got Facing Love Addiction by Pia Melody. We've got Cupid's Poisoned Arrow by Mania Robinson. We've got We by the Jungian psychologist Robert Johnson. You might not be able to see that, but you can hear my words. We've got The Eden Project by James Hollis. And finally, we've got The Invisible Partners by John Sanford. I've got about 50 to 60 books that I could have recommended for this video. I chose these 5 for a reason. These are the steps for you to take to heal yourself. You can literally heal the pattern, but you're probably not going to do it by watching another YouTube video. You're definitely not going to do it by going on one of those websites, and you are almost certainly not going to do it by not taking the opportunity to read one of the books that could genuinely change your life. So please do that. Leave a comment in the comments description about the book that you're going to buy, and maybe you'll encourage someone else to break out of that apathetic stage of not spending $10 to $15 on a book that will change their life. Rant over, video over. There's the next one, and I will see you with a big smile over there, unless it's a sad topic, in which case I might be frowning at the start. We'll find out.